Okay. We're going now to the Press Association, to PA for a later state of the parties. Our board has, at that point, fallen slightly behind. It doesn't, I think, significantly alter the point I'm making, that Labour is still a fair way to go to get to its necessary 316, but they can do it if they win all 4 marginals, which would fall to a swing of 4%. This is absolutely headed for extremely close finish indeed, and Labour has not yet got it in the bag, but I think we'll just get over the necessary 316.
Here are the full facts of Derbyshire West. This is Aidan Crawley's holding the seat.
This has reverted to being a fairly safe Conservative seat compared to the by-election when Aidan Crawley only just hung on. Still, the Conservatives are getting 17% less of the vote than they did back in 1959.
Canterbury, which the Tories have held in Kent with Sir Leslie Thomas.
Fairly.
Former Parliamentary Private Secretary of the Conservative government. Here's Ormskirk, and the Tories have held Ormskirk, which was once upon a time Mr. Harold Wilson's seat, wasn't it, Colonel? Sir Douglas Glover, the successor.
7% swing there in Ormskirk, next door to Highton, possibly an overspill of influence or an overspill of population from Liverpool.
Here's Caerphilly the Cheese in Glamorgan. Labour are in again there with a very well-known Member of Parliament, Mr. Ness Edwards.
The Welsh Nationalists, I think, dropped their vote there, as they have almost in every seat they've fought.
We have Gainsborough, of the artist, I nearly said. That stayed Tory with Mr. Marcus Kimball.
His majority is slightly up, in fact.
We have Melton of the Pies, which was Mervyn Pike, very well known, junior Conservative minister, has held for the Conservatives.
That's Anthony Nutting's seat. She got in when he resigned after Suez.
Remember, he didn't get back yesterday in Oldham, when his bid to come back to Parliament.
And what with Pies and everything else, we're now almost up to date.
I think we should...
Let's see the latest notice, the latest Press Association State of the Parties Board.
There we are, Labour now at 280, the PA State of the Parties Board. We estimate that there are 32 Labour-held seats to be heard from, which would bring Labour to 312, and Labour then needs to win all 4 of the marginals, which would fall to a swing of 4%. They are, and these become the absolutely key seats now. May I just draw them to your attention? These are Lowestoft, which requires a 1.6% swing to Labour, King's Lynn requiring a 2.1% swing, Norfolk South requiring a 3.8% swing, very, very close to the 4% swing that Labour's been getting, and not too hopeful, granted what's been happening in that area, and Meriden. There are the 4 seats which Labour must get of the marginals that remain in order to hit 316.
We now take the result from Clitheroe, which has been held for the Tories by Mr. Francis Pearson, who was Sir Alec Douglas Hume's Parliamentary Private Secretary.
There's one seat that Bob Mackenzie didn't mention, South Bedfordshire, where there's a recount, which is the one other seat that the Labour Party might gain on form if the results we're waiting for at the moment, and they also might gain Caithness, where there's a split.
William Whitelaw, a former Conservative junior minister, is back in Penrith and the Border for the Tories. No change there. I see that...
Joe Godber, the Minister of Labour, is back. 5 ministers have lost their seats during this election, but he's held on at Grantham with a slightly reduced majority.
Only
yes, the fact. 5,864.
2% swing to Labour, I guess, there.
Temporarily, we are to date. Any comments, Ian, about how things are now going?
No, it's terribly exciting. Just have to wait for these last five results, with the recount at South Bedfordshire, Meriden, where this tiny Conservative majority should go to Labour, and then these 3 seats in East Anglia. I must say it's fascinating that East Anglia should have the fate of the nation in its hands at this moment.
Yes. Let's go to the Press Association State of the Parties Board.
Labour there is still at 280, that's the critical figure to watch, and on our calculations with the Labour-held seats we're to hear from, we'll bring that up to 311 or 12, we're still arguing about 1, and then the 4 critical marginals with 2 other possibilities mentioned by David Butler could bring Labour up to 316, 317, 318 in that range, which would give them, of course, a majority overall of a very narrow thing indeed, under 10. And perhaps even a situation is still conceivable where the Liberals, if they do well in remaining seats, might hold the balance of power. This remains the possibility that we will not know the end of this election until the very last votes are counted, because we've got to wait for some which will come later today, and of course one at least which may come tomorrow. We now may face an agonizing situation right through the whole afternoon while we wait for these key marginals. Even when we've heard from them, there are one or two dicey seats that Labour would want to be sure they'd won, of course, as well.
In the film world, it's called cliffhanging. I see that Mr. William Deeds, who looked after information for the Conservative government, is in again at Ashford in Kent.
With a 2% swing.
Here are the full details of it.
A 2% swing to the Conservative, to Labour in Ashford. We've been saying things about ministers doing badly. Well, this doesn't seem to apply to Mr. Deeds in Ashford. The Liberal coming in got 22% of the vote, so you can hardly say that the Liberals are taking a lot of votes from the Conservatives if you get a rather better than average swing in Ashford.
It also doesn't apply to the Honourable Hugh Fraser, who was the Minister for Air, who is back in for the Conservatives at Stafford and Stowe. 4%
swing, 4.2% swing, but that's bigger than average for the West Midlands, which has been having only a 2% swing overall compared to the national average of about 4.
Full details of Mr. Godbert's success at Grantham. Go on, Ian, your chance now, quickly.
I was going to talk about Hugh Fraser.
Right, we'll let it go. The Liberals have held Cardiganshire.
This is very important. Here is their 5th seat tonight so far. Assuming they win Orkney and Shetland, it's almost inconceivable they won't. They're guaranteed 6 seats, which is what they came out of the 1959 election with. There are still a couple of other seats, Caithness and Inverness, where they obviously have legitimate hopes. They couldn't have more than 8 or fewer than 6 seats.
It means they are one down on what they had in the last Parliament, because, of course, in the last Parliament they picked up Orpington. They've still held Orpington, but they've lost 2 in the North Country.
In Worcestershire South, Commander Sir Peter Agnew has held the seat for the Tories. He was a former junior minister, or whip, rather.
3.5% swing in South Worcestershire.
Meanwhile, Barry and Glamorgan, the Tories have held the seat with Raymond Gower.
Defeating David Marquand, a very up-and-coming journalist, son of a former Labour minister. That's another case where a personal vote may come in, but Mr. Gower's majority has been very heavily cut, a 5% swing in that South Wales seat.
It's a Tory again for Yeovil, where John Paitent, the former Conservative junior minister, has held the seat for the Conservatives. No comments on Yeovil?
1.5% swing in Yeovil.
This is one which is very outside. It only needed a 6% swing to go to Labour. If there was really going to be a swing, it might have gone to Labour.
We will now go to the Press Association State of the Parties Board.
Labour still on that board at 280 and needing 316 to win. As far as we can calculate, there are 32 Labour-held seats to be heard from, which should bring it up to 312. There then are the 4 key marginals at least, Lowestoft, Kings Lynn, Norfolk South and Meriden, all of which will be critical for Labour to get, and 2 other possibilities. They could get Bedford South, which is recounting, and Caithness and Sutherland, which incidentally didn't report last time until 11 p.m. on the day.
News that Ian Gilmore has held Norfolk Central for the Tories. Here are the hard facts. A majority just over 6,000. Here are the full facts.
This is a recovery for the Conservatives very much from the by-election, which is the only recount in the last Parliament. The swing there is 1.9, which is fairly critical. It's a central compared to 59. On that swing, Lowestoft would go over to Labour, but South Norfolk wouldn't, Kings Lynn wouldn't. We know there's a recount in Kings Lynn. Here we have 3 East Anglian seats that we're waiting for, which will decide whether Labour has even not a working majority, but a majority or not.
Yes. A socking majority for the Ulster Unionist or Conservative candidate in Antrim North in Northern Ireland, not as big as it was.
90% of the vote went to the Conservatives there, and the Republican forfeited his deposit, even though he had a straight fight.
We're to date. Now then, what about the situation? Ian, we've moved since you last spoke.
Well, we've moved in a circle. The position still is that we're waiting for these now 4 key results, 5 key results: South Norfolk, Meriden, Lowestoft, Kings Lynn, Bedfordshire South. We know that there are recounts on 2 of them, and literally these 5 results are going to mean the difference between whether or not Labour has got a clear majority, let alone a working majority.
Well, if you want to bet on these, South Bedfordshire and Kings Lynn are both having recounts, so I think you can just regard them as a toss-up, whatever the sort of general form is. And South Norfolk is one that Labour can have very little hope of winning on relation to the other seats there. Meriden and Lowestoft are probable Labour gains, or Lowestoft is more or less a toss-up. Labour might conceivably lose North Norfolk, where the established Labour member was. I think it's the only seat they could conceivably lose. And then there's Caithness and Inverness in the north of Scotland, which are the other seats which are really on the margin today.
Now, this is also exciting. We'll go once again to the Press Association State of the Parties Board.
There we are. Labour's picked up 1 more needed toward the 316, 281. We still have no reason to doubt, however, that there are 31 reasonably safe Labour seats to be heard from, which would bring Labour to 312, which then, of course, brings us to this very key situation, namely, what about these 4 to 6 remaining ones at stake? They're now entered on the board, if they can follow us over here. The remaining ones of tremendous importance: Bedfordshire South, with a swing needed of 4.4, Kings Lynn, swing needed of 2.1, Lowestoft, Meriden, Norfolk South, and Caithness and Sutherland, which, as we were pointing out a moment ago, didn't report at the last election till 11 p.m. on the Friday. So there's a possibility that there's a certain amount of seesawing going on right through into this evening in that situation. But we expect to hear from these other ones in the course of the afternoon, and they will determine whether or not the Labour Party gets the necessary 316 so they may say that they've won the election. But then, of course, the whole question of a working majority, of having to approach the Liberals possibly to get a working majority, would be definitely on the cards. We might find that the Labour government taking power was, in a curious way, in a somewhat similar position to the first 2 Labour governments, when the Liberals were much stronger, of course, then, but they could rule only with the support of the Liberals. And there's a distinct possibility now that to get a working majority, the Labour Party will have to turn to the Liberals and make some kind of understanding with them. This is not certain, it's not a firm prediction, but this is a distinct possibility on the results as they now stand.
Turn to the right.
The Tories have held Ripon, Sir Malcolm Stoddart Scott in the West Riding.
3% swing in the West Riding.
In Gloucestershire West, the seats held by Labour, by Mr. Charles Loughran.
2% swing in the Forest of Dean.
Nice thought that for 1,000 years the Wakeman in Ripon has sounded the horn every night without a break. Wonderful tradition. Let us now go to the Press Association State of the Parties once again.
Labour's now got 283, moving very slowly toward the necessary 316, but on the evidence we have, they should move fairly comfortably up to 312 if they hold all their present seats, and then, of course, the final bitter struggle to go over the top at 316. But that will not, of course, be a working majority in itself, and therefore we're in the situation I was talking about a moment ago, where Labour may have to have some kind of understanding to get a working majority, some kind of understanding with the Liberals.
And so we go to Robin Day.
And with me, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, George Brown, one of the most colourful and effective campaigners in this whole general election in Transport House. Mr. Brown, did you hear those last remarks by Robert Mackenzie, speculating that you may not get an overall majority, and you may need to turn to the Liberals, as he put it, for a working majority?
Yes, I did, Robin, and I must say Bob Mackenzie has worked overtime since I first heard him at 10 o'clock last night to pretend we weren't doing what we are doing. I've never heard a man try so hard. But my guess is we'll be there. We'll be there by ourselves. We shall govern, and we shall carry out our mandate.
I'm not in charge of this operation, Mr. Brown, but maybe those who are up in the control room might like Bob Mackenzie to reply. Can they do that?
Well, why should they? Bob Mackenzie didn't stand for election.
Well, he said
But you're interviewing me. I am not having a debate with Robert Mackenzie. You asked to interview me. If you wish to interview me, please do so.
I do so. I merely thought my colleague might like to answer an attack on his professional reputation.
I'm sorry, I am not here to have a debate with Robert Mackenzie. That's not what you asked me to come for. I am here as a member of what looks like the new administration. I am very happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Well, I will proceed then. Do you think that you can govern under the conditions which we have just been speculating about?
We shall govern. The country has given us authority. I wish it had given us a wee bit more power, but we have our mandate. They know what it is we intend to do. Heavens above, we've explained it in I wouldn't know how many speeches, how many television and radio performances. We shall proceed to govern accordingly.
Do you think there is a possibility, though perhaps you can't speak on this, that the Liberals, Mr. Grimmond and his colleagues, might be invited to join a Labour-Liberal coalition government?
I wouldn't worry yourself about that. Labour looks like being elected, I believe has been elected. Labour will govern, and will govern, I repeat, according to the mandate for which it asked, and which, by being elected, if it is elected, has been given.
Mr. Grimmond was speaking a few moments ago, and he said one of the matters he would want to talk about in giving his support to a Labour government might be the question of electoral reform in view of the position of perhaps 3 million votes and only perhaps 5 Liberal members. What do you say about that?
Don't worry yourself quite so much about Mr. Grimmond. You have an obsession with him. You are at the moment...
I don't have an obsession with him, Mr. Grimmond. He happens to be in a key position.
Look, I'm sorry, you asked me a question. You must let me answer it. I didn't interrupt your question. You have, in my view, an obsession with Mr. Grimmond. You are now interviewing a member of what looks like being the new administration. I will answer for myself. You must ask him anything you want to ask him. So far as we are concerned, we shall govern. We shall govern according to the policy we put to the people. We shall govern with determination, with understanding of our people's point of view as expressed, but we shall govern, and we will do our best to put this nation back on its feet using the power that our people have given us.
Mr. Brown, the point of my last question was, and I apologize for interrupting you, was this, that according to the figures here, which I haven't invented, Mr. Grimmond is in an influential position, or may be. Now, would you be prepared to consider what he was talking about, namely some question of electoral reform?
May I repeat my question? It looks as though the country has elected a government. We asked for power for a particular set of steps and for a particular set of policies. We shall govern if we are in fact elected. If Harold Wilson goes to see the Queen later on and then invites me and some of my colleagues to join him, we shall govern on those policies, and nobody, but nobody, who has not been given a mandate is going to be allowed to tell us on what terms we govern, and the people will be asked to judge us by the way in which we carry out the mandate they have given us, whatever the limits of power within which we have to work.
May I put to you some suggestions which are going around the City of London this morning, judging by the reports which we've seen here, that because of this situation and the small majority which a Labour government is likely to have, that you would be less likely to nationalise steel. Would you care to comment?
I have already done it. My good gracious me, Robin, you don't seem to listen.
I do listen, Mr. Brown.
Well, then I don't know why you repeat the question.
I haven't asked you that question before.
Yes, but I have...
You may be a member of the new administration, Mr. Brown, but I'm still entitled to ask you whatever questions I like, which are reasonable.
If I may say so, you're also going all the way through my answers. I have already said that we will govern, and I think I'm repeating my words exactly, according to the mandate which we sought from the people, which the people have given us by however little a majority, and Mr. Day, that mandate included the public ownership of steel. Now, I did in fact say that. It remains true.
Mr. Brown, thank you very much indeed. I look forward to interviewing you again.
Thank you, Mr. Day. I hope when you next interview me, you don't interrupt quite so often.
Mr. Brown, it is a little difficult interviewing somebody down the line, and I hope that you don't
It's quite a little difficult being interviewed down the line.
I hope you don't take it personally,
Not a bit, Mr. Day. I like you immensely, but you must understand the rules by which we do this.
May I call you brother?
If you wish, I would be very flattered and delighted.
Goodbye, Mr. Brown.
Goodbye, Brother Day.
Well, 3 rousing good cheers and a happy Christmas to all our readers. We'll certainly let Mr. Mackenzie have a word in a minute. I think he's just about playing his top up on the platform there. However, now, where are we? We better have a look at this likely majority. It is down, as you see, Labour likely majority, according to computer, over the Conservatives, is down to the figure of 11. Life is indeed getting dramatic in more ways than one. Mr. Selwyn Lloyd is safely back at Wirral in Cheshire. Here are the full figures.
A 6.5% swing. That looks big, but in fact it's less than in almost all the other seats in the Merseyside area, and less than Mr. Marple's in Wallasey next door.
Selwyn Lloyd, of course, had a remarkably checkered career in the last Parliament, finished up as Leader of the House.
Labour holds North West Durham with Mr. Ernest Armstrong, schoolmaster.
Under 2% in that swing in that mining seat.
Hemsworth, another big Labour win at Hemsworth, happens to be expected, I think.
The biggest majority we've had yet in a very safe seat, under the 1% swing to Labour, though.
There is a Tory again with Mr. Timothy Kitson, a former parliamentary private secretary in the Conservative government for Richmond in Yorkshire.
A 6% swing, possibly partly attributable to 20% won by his old friend Mr. Schellenberg, who stood against him as a Liberal.
Mr. Schellenberg, of course, is an Olympic bobsleigh man.
We have Howden, where the Tories have held the seat with Mr. Paul Bryan.
2.3% swing in that East Riding seat, the Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party getting back again.
And at Bladen, where you go to the races, up in Durham, I see that Mr. Wolf, a coal miner, has held the seat for Labour.
1.5% swing in that northeast mining seat.
Ayrshire South, Emrys Hugh, is a very well-known Labour member, is back.
3% swing, but that's rather low for Scotland, where we've been having much higher swings than in the south of England.
Sir Lionel Heald, the well-known Conservative, law officer, formerly Attorney General, is back at Chertsey in Surrey for the Conservative.
3% swing there, Liberal vote up 7%.
Desmond Donnelly is back at Pembroke, where the last invasion of Britain took place, safely for Labour.
This used to be a marginal seat, but Desmond Donnelly seems to have entrenched himself and built up a very sizable majority there.
It's William Lloyd George's seat.
There's William Warby for Labour, who is back in Ashfield for Labour.
One of the most left-wing members of the Labour Party, particularly on foreign affairs.
Well, that takes us to date for the moment on results. We'll have the Press Association say to the parties and Mr. Mackenzie.
There we are, Labour 288 now, with something like, by our calculation, 24 Labour seats to be heard from, which would bring them to 312, and it depends, of course, on these critical marginals of 4 to come. There's no new government, of course, can be involved until there is 316. I'm very fond of George, and no hard feelings, George. Perhaps we can argue it out over a drink sometime.
Got me with a sandwich. Sorry. Ian, what about some comments you would like to go on Egypt?
Yes, indeed. I was just thinking at this precise moment, Labour will give practically anything to have 4 or 5 of those seats that they lost last night. It's quite interesting to see where and how they lost them. There were 2 they should have picked up in Bristol North East and North West, which I thought almost certainly they probably lost because of the row which has blown up this week over the grammar schools and the comprehensive schools. Then there's the question of the tube strike. What wouldn't they have given to have won Uxbridge, as indeed they should have done, possibly Brentford and Chiswick. And then there are these 3 in the West Midlands. Well, this is a more general swing, but there were at least 3, if not 4 seats, which Labour might have won yesterday if it weren't for something which blew up in the news in the last 3 or 4 days of the election campaign. This might make all the difference to their position.
One thing that struck me when we last looked at the scoreboard, Labour had made a net gain of 54 seats. Now, they went into this election allowing for vacant seats with 261 seats. 261 plus 54 makes 315, which is a clear working majority. We're still waiting for 5 results that they might win, so 321 is about the Labour maximum. There's 1 seat they might lose, so 314 is about the Labour minimum in the election we're waiting for. So Labour is virtually guaranteed, I think, on all the swings and roundabouts, guessing, virtually guaranteed a majority, but not, I think, a working majority over all parties, though a working majority of the Liberals vote with them.
Yeah. At Pontypridd, in the South Wales coalfield, Arthur Pearson, Labour whip, has held the seat for Labour.
A 3% swing in Pontypridd. That's an extra large swing for a mining seat, which has been very much stabler than other parts of the country.
Let's take the State of the Parties board again, and to Robert Mackenzie.
There we are, Labour to 291 now, with every indication still that that'll go up to 312, 14, in that 15, 16, in that area, according to the expectations, and perhaps up to 317. If we could turn now to look at the state of the parties. Oh, sorry, there we are on it. I'd like to come over now to the forecast table. Here we get the national swing still around 4.1, a likely Labour majority over the Conservatives of 11, but it looks as if there may be 5 Liberal seats, perhaps even 6, and this is why you get this situation of a very, very narrow position indeed if one thinks of the position of Labour over all members in the House. Total votes picture. This is the way they've been dividing so far. It's very interesting that the share of vote so far by Conservatives and Labour is extremely close as of now. 10 million votes, 400,000 for the Conservatives, 10,600,000 for Labour. 43.6%, 44.2%. This is a very close thing as far as the division of the popular vote is concerned, but Labour has a disadvantage, needs to pile up a larger number of votes from the Conservatives in order to break even in seats. Looking again now at the party horse race at the top of the board, Labour 291, Conservatives 270, with the winning post at the 316. And a good deal of evidence, as we've said, of a photo finish if you add together the top and bottom lines, as you could do if both go into opposition against the Labour Party.
Here, for a quick glance, is the party lead board. This is a race which is unbearably exciting. The Labour lead over Conservative at the moment, 20 according to our board. There are 63 results to come, the time 1:32. We now have the one place I always get wrong, Bethwelty or Bedwelty. I can never remember, and I apologise to you right now. Here's the result. There's no change. A Labour landslide, says my card in my hand.
Under 2% swing in Bedwelty.
Don't ask me, I can never remember. Never mind. Here's Durham up north, which Labour has held in the person of Mr. Charles Grey.
Swing just under 2% in that mining seat. The mining seats have been very steady, all of them, with a 1 to 2% swing.
Bethwelty, Bedwestley. I looked it up yesterday. I got it right last night, and I cannot remember it. I do apologise. Never mind. There's a rush result coming in, I believe.
The Labour gained somewhere. Labour gained King's Lynn. Well, this is one they desperately needed to win. It only needed a swing of just over 2% for them to get it, so they, if they hadn't got it, they really would have been in dire trouble. The Labour Conservatives have held this ever since 1951, and it was held by Mr. Dennis Bullard. There he is. He held the seat for them
with the majority
in 1959. He had a majority of 1,700. He's now lost it to that very, very narrow majority to Labour. Mr. Dennis Bullard has lost it.
He lost South West Norfolk back in 1955, and here twice he's gone just against the trend, or in the Norfolk trend. A 2% swing, though, does give Labour hope in the key seat of Lowestoft, though it doesn't give them much hope in South Norfolk, which is one of the other seats they should win. But that gain does seem to me to point to Labour almost certainly having at least 316 seats in the next Parliament, and they could still have 320 seats in the next Parliament. Remember, 316 is a clear majority, and if you allow for the Speaker, 315 is a clear majority. I think Mr. Brown is justified in saying firmly that Labour has won the election.
Yes. Here's the full figure. Labour gain at King's Lynn, and the figures for your record if you wish to have them.
A 2% swing to Labour in King's Lynn. East Anglia is certainly staying the county of marginals. Norfolk.
I see that at Abingdon, Mr. Airy Neve, who escaped from the Colditz camp and prosecuted at the Nuremberg trial and is well known as a writer, has held the seat for the Conservatives. There is no change there.
5% swing in Abingdon.
On these figures that David was just mentioning, if Labour gets 316, counting out the Speaker, then they would have a majority of 3 over all other parties. All you need is have a taxi breakdown, and they haven't got a majority. On the other hand, if they get the 6 Liberals with them, they would then have a majority of 15, which would look much more healthy. And to that extent, I think Mr. Brown's attitude towards the Liberals might need a slight amendment.
We have Horncastle, a Tory again for Horncastle, with Commander Sir John Maitland on the east coast of Lincolnshire.
4% swing there, but the significant thing is the Liberal, not having fought before, got 25% of the poll, and just by 25 votes pipped the Labour Party for second place.
Robert Maitland is back in Honiton of the lace and the traffic blocks in the West Country, which the Tories have held.
Here's another case for the Liberals coming second. The Liberals are going to have a great many more second places when all the results are in than they had after the 1959 election.
How are they getting on towards their 3 million, which they were hoping to get?
Let's go once again now, before we answer the question, to the state of the parties.
Labour now at 296, creeping up, it's changing as we look at it, 297, with needing to pick up there in all 19 more seats to go over to get the 316. We estimate there are 20 Labour seats coming, or maybe, 19 or 20, which in itself may do the job, although there are the other 2 or 3 marginals still to be heard from, 2 of which are recounting, by the way, as far as we've heard. So clearly the thing is very close indeed.
News here of Norfolk North, held by Labour, a 53 majority.
Even more important that the Conservatives have held Lowestoft, which was a seat that Labour desperately needed to get. It was one that they only a 1.5% swing. There it's been held by Jim Pryor for the Conservatives. There he is.
A swing to the Conservatives in Lowestoft, a swing to the Conservatives in Norfolk North, but not quite enough to give them the seat. I don't think there are any seats due to come now that Labour could lose, and we're still waiting for Meriden, South Beds and South Norfolk, which Labour could win. I don't think they've really got much chance of winning South Norfolk on the current East Anglian form. So we're really waiting for Meriden and South Beds, which could put Labour up from 316 to 318 seats, with Caithness as a possible extra gain.
Labour has Norfolk North.
Here are the figures.
There are 3 marginals still to be heard from, 2 of which are recounting, by the way, as far as we've heard. So clearly the thing is very close indeed.
News here of Norfolk North, held by Labour, a 53 majority.
Even more important that the Conservatives have held Lowestoft, which was a seat that Labour desperately needed to get. It was one that they only a 1.5% swing. There it's been held by Jim Pryor for the Conservatives. There he is.
A swing to the Conservatives in Lowestoft, a swing to the Conservatives in Norfolk North, but not quite enough to give them the seat. I don't think there are any seats due to come now that Labour could lose, and we're still waiting for Meriden, South Beds and South Norfolk, which Labour could win. I don't think they've really got much chance of winning South Norfolk on the current East Anglian form. So we're really waiting for Meriden and South Beds, which could put Labour up from 316 to 318 seats, with Caithness as a possible extra gain.
Labour has Norfolk North. Here are the figures. No change there.
0.7% swing to the Conservatives in Norfolk North. Mr. Edwin Gooch's seat has only just been held by Labour.
We go now to the Press Association State of the Parties.
Labour up to 297 now, with the 19 to go, and every prospect of getting it, which would just put them into their 316. They may go to 317, 18, but the majority does look as if it'll be under 10 over all parties in the House, and it could be as small as 3 or 4 over all parties in the House.
Chichester is in for the Conservatives in West Sussex, Mr. Walter Lovey. No change there. Lowestoft, this is confirmation of what we just had rather urgently, an important seat.
That's Mr. Pryor. He's a local farmer. He went out in trawlers to see how his fishing constituents fared, and it's obviously paid him off.
A 1% swing to the Conservatives in Lowestoft, over 1% swing to the Conservatives, right against the national trend, and despite a Liberal intervention, the Liberal lost his deposit. They got 10% of the vote. I do think that it's possible that the Labour Party, after this election is over, may be blaming the Liberals for intervening. I know the Liberals dislike one using the word intervening. The Liberals for standing in seats they didn't stand in 59. They may be blaming the Labour Party. The Labour Party may be blaming the Liberals quite as much as the Conservatives.
We have 2 key results we're still waiting for, of course. Meanwhile, here's news that Labour has held Pontefract with the licorice cakes and much else besides with Mr. Harper.
A very slight swing to the Conservatives in Pontefract, 0.2%.
Labour's in again at Concert with Mr. William Stones up in the Durham coalfield.
1.3% swing in that mining seat.
They are also in again in Gower.
3% swing in that Welsh mining seat.
The Tories have Northamptonshire South.
This is one
Let's now go straight to the state of the parties again.
Labour at 298, needing 18 more to get their 316.
We have 2 key results we're still waiting for, of course. Meanwhile, here's news that Labour has held Pontefract with the licorice cakes and much else besides with Mr. Harper.
A very slight swing to the Conservatives in Pontefract, 0.2%.
Labour's in again at Concert with Mr. William Stones up in the Durham coalfield.
1.3% swing in that mining seat.
They are also in again in Gower.
3% swing in that Welsh mining seat.
The Tories have Northamptonshire South.
This is one
Let's now go straight to the state of the parties again.
Labour at 298, needing 18 more to get their 316. They're certainly sure of 14 or 15 more on our calculation, and should get, if they can take 3 of the 4 remaining possible wins, they should be up over their 316. But this is extremely tight still, and it is, I think, premature to say that 316 is assured. Party leads then. Now the Labour lead, which was 67, excuse me, earlier today, is now down to 20 over the Conservatives. And we've got 49 results to come on that record. Of those results, there are, I think, 4 that Labour, marginals that Labour could win over from the Conservatives.
Norfolk South and Meriden are the two seats we're really waiting for, I think. Norfolk South and Meriden. There's no sign of them yet. Chesterle Street up here. Aye, aye. Chesterle Street, Mr. Norman Pentland holds the seat for Labour.
Another safe mining seat in Durham. Nothing unexpected there.
Hertfordshire East, here's a well-known man back, Conservative, Sir Derek Walker-Smith.
3% swing in East Hertfordshire. Liberal hardly going up at all in his share of the vote from last time, 16%.
Let's now have a look briefly at the likely Labour majority over the Conservatives as the computer gives it, at the moment as 11. We now take the Carlton result from Nottinghamshire, where Sir Kenneth Pickthorne is back for the Conservatives.
Here was a very outside bet for Labour gain, but in fact was only a 2% swing there. Liberals fought, not having fought before, got 17% of the vote. It doesn't seem to have affected the swing much.
Mr. Bell has Buckinghamshire South for the Conservatives.
A 3% swing in South Buckinghamshire compared to 1959. And Liberals came second there with a good big increase in the vote.
The Honourable Clive Bossam has Leominster, or Leominster, for the Conservatives.
The Liberals come second there, as they did in 1959.
Labour has held Abertillery or Abertillery.
Just under 1% swing in that safe mining, Welsh mining seat.
In Hertford, we have Lord Balneil back again for the Conservatives.
5% swing in Hertford again, Newtown, overspill areas, which have in many cases gone slightly more for Labour than other parts of the outer suburbs.
An Ulster Unionist, in other words, Conservative victory in Londonderry in Northern Ireland, for Robert Chichester Clark.
A much bigger nationalist vote there. There are, of course, two nationalist seats for Manor and South Tyrone and Mid-Ulster, which the Conservatives could conceivably lose on past form. They didn't hold it for the most of the last 40 years. Those two seats have been held by abstention, mostly by abstentionists who refused to go to Westminster. So that could have a net effect of adding 1 to the Labour majority, or 2 to the Labour majority.
No surprise probably that East Grinstead remains Tory with Mrs. Evelyn Emmett.
5% swing there, though again it's rather meaningless. The Liberals came second in yet another Sussex seat. Big increase in their vote, up 9% to 27%.
We'll now go once again to the state of the party to see what's happening.
Labour creeping up now, almost to the 300, I guess going to 300 right now. And is every indication, it is, 300 now. Every indication that this will certainly go 314, 15, 16, 17, in that range somewhere. Yeah, okay. The position then is we're really hanging on tenterhooks for certain results that are still to come. Norfolk South, Meriden, Bedford South, Caithness and Sutherland, which could be a very late one indeed, coming late today. And these are the 4 which Labour ideally must win in order to get well over the 316, at least the 317, 318. And this is part of the problem at the moment, that we're waiting for these, at least one of which is recounting, and perhaps 2, according to our latest information. Forecast board then. Swing now, the latest word on it is that it's just over the 3.5%. In other words, that in these seats reporting today, the Tories have been running stronger, and it's 3.7% swing as against the 3.5% required. This likely Labour majority is over the Conservatives and ignores the 5 Liberal seats, and there may be 6, which are involved. And that's why it's very narrow indeed. The total votes position so far on the night is as follows. You can see how very close indeed it is. 10.4 million for the Conservatives, 10.6 million for Labour. The division between them, 43.6. That's the Conservatives compared to 49 at the last election. Labour has 44.2 compared to 43.8 at the last election. Labour's share of the vote then is up by something under 1 point. The Liberals running much stronger than last time, though having many more candidates up. They're still racking up 11% of the vote. The turnout is still down on last time.
After the recount in South Bedfordshire, Mr. Norman Cole has held the seat for the Conservatives.
And this is a blow to Labour. This is one of the 3 seats we are waiting for, and I don't think they're going to win South Norfolk. So Meriden is the one seat that we're expecting from England, where Labour have still a hope of a gain to increase their total seats from the 316 they seem more or less assured of getting when all the results are in, to something a little more workable. So there's Meriden, which might push them up to 317, but having failed to win South Bedfordshire, they must pray for something odd happening in Caithness, where the Conservative vote is split, and that might push them up still to 318. I think they were in that area, a Labour majority, certainly in single figures over all other parties.
Difficult to know really quite what their chances were in South Bedfordshire, because it's an extraordinary constituency. The electorate's gone up 18,000 since the last election. So Mr. Cole, instead, has held this seat ever since 1951. If we're talking about the personal vote, I'm sure this had a value there.
We have Brigg Fair, Lincolnshire, where Mr. Edward Mallew has held the seat for Labour.
A 4% swing to Labour in this Lincolnshire steel town.
Yeah, it includes a lot of Scunthorpe, does it not? Down south, which really means up north, Northern Ireland. Down south, which has been held by the Ulster Unionist candidate. Tory win again there. We'd better take, I think, straight away now, before any further comments, a new situation of the state of the parties.
301 to Labour now, with 15 more needed for the winning post cross, which is on the record. It is still somewhere in the range, it's changed again before our eyes, 302 now in. Somewhere in the range 315, 16, 17 is the range of probability, and we will certainly be hanging on the last few results before we know exactly where that figure settles.
Now let's have a quick look. The likely majority, the figure which we give here, you see, is 9. This is likely majority over Conservatives.
And since the Liberals are going to get at least 6 seats, that's only a likely majority of 3 over all parties, or 2 over all parties. But Norfolk South hasn't changed hands, and so that does mean there's only 1 marginal seat still to come from England.
Peter Thornycroft. Peter Thornycroft held Monmouth, Minister of Defence, by a greatly reduced majority. It was over 6,000. It's now down to 700.
That's a very great swing. That's a 6% swing. Again, one of these swings against ministers. Again, against a fairly much criticised minister.
Yeah, leave him in. Any more results to come, gentlemen? Further comments until we take a result. Ian?
Well, it all hinges on one now. I mean, assuming that they win Meriden, which I think they're bound to, this would give them, what, 316, 317?
Would give them 317.
317, which would be a majority of 5 over all other parties. That's counting the Speaker as independent. On the other hand, the 6 Liberals could put this up to 17, which would make it look much healthier.
We have Houghton-le-Spring, which has been held.
But with a swing to the Conservatives in this Durham mining seat, 1% swing to the Conservatives.
This may have had something to do with the fact that the much-respected former MP, Bill Blakenham, who was a miner, had to retire under a compulsory rule, which everybody thought was a pity. So you had a new Labour MP there.
Mr. Frederick Lee's in again for Labour at Newton.
And Mr. Lee will almost certainly be in the Wilson government, which we must now more and more be thinking of.
5% swing to Labour in that Lancashire seat.
In Hemel Hempstead, the Conservatives have held the seat, Mr. James Allison.
3% swing to Labour in that Conservative seat, not quite a marginal.
Up in Scotland, Ayrshire, Northern Bute, Sir Fitzroy Maclean, very famous MP, is back for the Conservatives.
But a swing of 5.5%, more or less the sort of Scottish average, which is way above that for England.
Norfolk South, no change.
And
here's your answer.
There was a swing of 1% to Labour, but not enough to give them the seat. The Liberals came in and fought this time and just saved their deposit with 13% of the vote, but the Conservatives were comfortably in with a 6% majority.
There is a recount of Meriden, which is the one seat everybody is now shouting for. I've just been told Meriden is recounting, so you're just going to have to hang on the cliff and wait. Let's see the state of the parties meanwhile, shall we?
Labour now up to 302, with 60 gains so far. There's every prospect of that turning eventually into 314, 15, 16, 17, 18, somewhere in that range, that critical range, with the everything hanging at the moment on the one marginal we haven't heard from, Meriden, which requires a 0.3% swing to Labour to be taken, and we learn they're having a recount. That is the hair's breadth on which the thing hangs at the moment. Of course, Caithness and Sutherland would require a 15% swing to Labour, but there is a split there which might have some effect, and we may not hear from that seat till later this evening. Of course, there are 1 or 2 uncertainties about Northern Ireland, as David explained earlier as well. But this couldn't be any closer than, and it's very close indeed, the kind of thing we had in that strange afternoon on a Friday in 1950 when Labour came back with a 6 or 7 majority at that time.
Well, so we sit waiting while they count all over again the votes in that one place of Meriden, which happens incidentally to be the exact geographical heart of England. Whether there's anything significant about that, I wouldn't know. We wait for Meriden. Meanwhile, we have from Holton Price in the East Riding of Yorkshire, we have Patrick Wall in again for the Conservatives.
With a 2% swing to Labour in that East Riding seat. and a very large
We have
Liberal
the
vote.
full details of Bedfordshire South. Here are the figures. Very close they are.
A 4% swing to Labour in Bedfordshire South, but not quite enough to turn the scale in that much expanded seat just to the west of Luton.
Mr. William Baxter has held Stirlingshire West for Labour.
Only a 1% swing there. That's about the lowest swing we've had from any Scottish seat yet.
Monmouth, this is the full details of the Peter Thornycroft result.
6.3% swing. This is certainly an above average swing. There were certain population changes in Monmouth, and there was a Liberal standing who didn't stand before. Just over 13% of the vote just saved his deposit.
Now, we have a comment on this most exciting situation while we wait for the Meriden recount from Ian.
Yes, well, all we can do is to wait for Meriden on the main horse race. One interesting thing is, if my mathematics is right, the Liberals have now polled the biggest vote they ever in the last 35 years. They've gone over 2,700,000. At the same time, they've only got at the most, well, they may just have 7 MPs, but it looks as if they'll have 6. So this question of proportional representation, from their point of view, does become pretty urgent, because it means that they will have, every Liberal MP will have needed 500,000 votes, where every Conservative or Labour MP will have taken, what, about 45,000 votes.
We have Louth in Lincolnshire on the coast, which Sir Cyril Osborne has held for the Conservatives.
A 3% swing to Labour in that Lincolnshire seat.
So now we are momentarily up to date with our results, but oh lummy, where's that Meriden one?
I don't think, I think without Meriden, Labour is at 316. Bob suggested there's a certain indeterminacy, and we can't absolutely guarantee that we haven't lost a result somewhere or other. But it seems to me that unless something quite fantastic happens in the results still to come, Labour can't fall below 316 seats. Now, it is possible if they won Meriden, if they won Caithness isn't, I think, very likely, they would get up to 318. But that's the margin within which we're working now. There's no doubt that Labour has won, but there's no doubt that they haven't got anything like a working majority, and 1 or 2 doesn't make an enormous difference. It means whether they can survive a by-election loss or 2 by-election losses after they take office.
Well, now, shall we take State of the Parties again? We will. State of the Parties.
Labour at 303 now, with 13 required. With 13 required to get over the 316, which means they've won. It does look as if they're going to get it, but whether they get the extra 2 or 3 to get a little room for manoeuvre over the whole House is still an open question. Meriden in Warwickshire is still the place that we're waiting for with most eagerness while they're recounting. The party lead now, Labour lead over Conservatives is down from 67 when we began to 13, and the position now is, of course, that doesn't take into account the 5 Liberals, who might be 6 Liberals, which would cut that lead down rather more if it was over the whole House.
Lord Lambton is back in Berwick-on-Tweed in Northumberland for the Conservatives.
A 1% swing to Labour there. The Liberals just came 3rd in Lord Beveridge's old seat. It was a Liberal-held seat till 1945.
I think it'd do us all a world of good just for a second to relax, otherwise all the tops of our heads are going to come off. I then have a sandwich. Somebody's just rung up and say, what are you eating? It's BBC sandwich. It's cheese and salmon.
It's a BBC sandwich.
Yeah, and I've got a bit of pizza, which is Italian as well. And by the way, on a slightly more serious note, I understand we've been receiving some telephone calls. I'm keeping an eye open for results. Don't worry, the machine's just started to tick. I'll tell you quickly. I've just had some telephone calls saying that why are people missing Watch with Mother? And I'm afraid that today you'll just have to watch with Dad if Dad's watching instead. But I think we must go on with this and today give a miss to Watch with Mother. I apologise to all juniors who aren't interested in what we're doing. Here's Totnes in Ray Morby's seat, which he's held for the Conservatives.
A 3.3% swing to the Labour Party in Totnes. The Liberal vote goes up slightly, up 2% in Totnes.
Ray Morby is no longer the only trade unionist among the Conservative benches. He's been joined by Sir Ted Brown, who's got in for Bath.
Let's take the Press Association State of the Parties once again.
Labour now within 4 seats of the necessary 316 for an official win, and every prospect in the world they'll get those 4. Conservatives have pulled up to 300, you'll notice, and with the Liberals 5, that gives the opposition at the present time, potential opposition I mean, 305 to Labour's present 312. Now we'd like to look back for just a moment at the opinion polls. Remember, we were giving you at the very opening of the whole program what the opinion polls were saying. On the day, NOP was saying a 3 3/4 swing to Labour, an amazingly accurate finding when you consider it's been actually 3.6%, and they were pointing to a Labour majority of 12, which, after all, is perhaps a little larger than the overall majority is likely to be. Gallup was predicting, or was pointing to, on one of their polls, 4%, which again is not bad in relation to a 3.6% swing as we've got it so far. Research services didn't come badly out of it either in one sense, but they were on the low side and therefore projecting in the direction of Conservative win. They, however, were giving theirs 4 days before the actual polling day. Daily Express was fairly far out, pointing as they were to a Conservative majority of 60. But it does show, after all, that in the final polls you can come with luck fairly close to it, and of course a good deal of good management is involved in getting that close as well.
Labour has held the Northumberland seaport of Blythe with Mr. Edward Milne.
Just over 1% swing to Labour in that seat.
Captain Kirby is back for the Conservatives in West Sussex, in Arundel and Shoreham, Duke of Norfolk's territory.
4% swing in Arundel and Shoreham. The swing has been fairly high all over Sussex.
And we'll now go up on the platform to Robin Day, who's sitting up there, I see, with Anthony Howard.
Yes. Anthony Howard, did you hear that discussion we had a few moments ago between Professor Griffiths and Sir Gerald Barrow about the constitutional position?
I did indeed.
Well, as I understood it, Professor Griffiths said that even though the Labour Party get an overall majority now, perhaps 1 or 2 seats, the Prime Minister, Sir Alec Douglas Hume, would be constitutionally justified in waiting till the new House assembled.
Well, I think Professor Griffiths was right constitutionally, but you know, he really was living in cloud cuckoo land. If one looks at the trade figures that came out today, if one considers the confidence that the rest of the world has got to have in this country, if the Conservative government sticks in a state of sort of suspension for the next fortnight, then I think we must all tremble at what would happen in the nation at large.
And as a political correspondent who moves close to the leading politicians all the time, and knowing Sir Alec Douglas Hume, what is your assessment of his sense of propriety and duty in this matter?
I think his sense of propriety and duty will be impeccable.
In other words, that he would go as soon as he sees Labour over the top.
Provided that he doesn't listen to. He may get certain advisers who will tell him not to do so, but really, Robin, you know, it is totally impossible. One thing is going to be quite clear, that Labour Party is going to be the largest single party in the House of Commons. I'm guessing now, but I am pretty confident it's going to have a much larger aggregate vote. And for a government to stay in when the whole trend is against it, when it's lost 50 odd seats, more than 50 seats. This is the kind of thing you cannot do in this situation. And I have no doubt Sir Alec will recognise that.
How difficult do you think it will be for Labour to govern effectively and to carry through its controversial mandate to which Mr. George Brown was referring so eloquently?
Well, I think this very odd thing has happened here. Perhaps the unsung hero of this election is Mr. Woodrow Wyatt. There were a lot of people talking about Lib-Labism 3-4 years ago. But suddenly this has become the issue.
You said unsung or unhung?
Unsung is what I said. And of course Roy Jenkins was saying exactly the same thing immediately after the '59 election, and I think force of circumstance has brought us as near as we are likely to get to some kind of realignment of the left in this country.
Now, you mentioned Mr. Woodrow Wyatt advocated a Lib-Lab electoral pact to combine against the Conservatives, didn't he?
That's what Woodrow Wyatt advocated.
Quite. Do you think that this is now going to be revived then in a new form of, as it were, a Lib-Lab pact in Parliament?
Well, it's quite different from an electoral pact,
yes,
but I do not think that Mr. Grimond has any room for manoeuvre. He has said time and again, quite properly and quite rightly, that he would support the majority party. He's going to have a majority party in Parliament, he's going to have a majority party in the country. And just as it will be Sir Alec Douglas Hume's duty to resign, it will be his duty to maintain the Queen's government and to assist to say to Mr. Wilson, all right, I will keep you in power.
And without any terms?
Well, he will try and extract terms, but really, you know, Mr. Grimond is in a rather unfortunate position. He's got nothing to deliver, and he must know as well as you and I do that
but he will have 6 or 7
will have 6 or 7 seats, but another election, what I'm saying is he's in a weak position because it's his party that would suffer. One, the Liberal Party hasn't got any money after this election. 2, they really can't run this kind of slate of candidates again. In a squeeze, as this would be, they would probably lose even the seats they've now got. So he's not in a strong bargaining position.
Briefly, Anthony Howard, do you think that the Conservatives could have won this election by a different campaign strategy?
Well, I thought you were going to ask me a different question. I thought you were going to say...
Well, answer that one first, then answer the one you want to ask afterwards.
No, I think that there were accidents in the campaign strategy, but they played it the right way, and they were only let down by Mr. Hogg, Mr. Herbert Hill, and possibly, though I would take this lightly, by Mr. Butler, but I think their basic strategy, keep it quiet, play it jovially and easily, personified by Mr. Maudling, who I thought put up a splendid performance throughout the whole election campaign, was right.
Let me ask you the question you thought I was going to ask.
That's
you.
right.
Do you think they would have won it better under another leader?
I think if Mr. Maudling had been leader of the Conservative Party in this election, the chances are that the even balance that we're now seeing would have been the other way round.
Thank you very much, Anthony Howard.
2:28 or 9, no news at all of Meriden yet. We go to the state of the parties.
Only 13 more results left to come, as you'll see there. The Labour lead over the Conservatives alone is 12. And, of course, when you turn to the state of the parties board, Labour is now at 312, having got 60 gains, Conservative at 300, Liberals at 5. If you assume on that board that Labour is the potential government, then the position is 312 for the potential government against 305 for the potential opposition. Looking at the party horse race, same thing put slightly differently. Here you've got the Conservatives behind Labour by 12, with the horses running, as it were, pretty nearly nose and nose, and you consider they've come a very long way, and Liberals with 5, 2 less than they had at the dissolution.
Now, a crowd is collecting, a bigger crowd in Downing Street. I see Michael Barrett of Panorama down there. Let's go over and join him outside the door.
Well, it's becoming more tense here every moment. The crowd is slowly growing bigger. The faces, as you may see, are still fairly tense. They're all of them looking at that doorway, number 10, Downing Street. And as people come and go, always the ripple goes around, who's that? Is he a bodyguard? What does this mean? Is the Prime Minister coming out now? If he does come out, where is he going to go, in fact? Is he coming out now? Once again, the cameramen get ready with their cameras to take him. If he does come out, is he going to the Central Office? Is he going to the Palace? What is he going to do? Well, one can only wait and see. It, but presumably will only be minutes now. This is Michael Barrett in Downing Street.
Let's look at the figure, shall we, as it now is.
Labour leads still at 12. We're actually standing by now for every result that comes in. And, of course, Meriden being the one that's extremely important. They're still recounting there. It had one recount and maybe, for all we know, moving to a second one. It's taking so long. And we'll hear at any time what happens. Labour is still at 312. The Liberals, of course, are an important factor, whatever anyone may say. The important thing to keep in mind here, I think, is that Anthony Howard properly pointed out their position is weak in one sense, a bargaining position, because they would not want, obviously, to fight on another massive election campaign very soon. At the same time, they would be a great asset to the Labour Party if the Labour Party could rely on them in the early stages of ruling, certainly, on certain ranges of radical programme which they might be able to reach agreement on.
According to the latest information, it could be that the Meriden result will be in 3 to 5 minutes, but one should never quite trust those sort of timings. Meanwhile, comment on the situation from you, David.
Well, one thing, we're going to have to wait, I think, quite a long time to get the final thing. If Labour doesn't win Meriden, then for them to get 316 seats, they've got to win the Western Isles. And I believe there they've got to bring the ballots in by boat, and the result won't be out till pretty late this evening. There are 2 other seats, Ross and Cromarty and the Caithness and Sutherland, which always report very late. So I'm afraid that you may be still kept on tenterhooks about the final outcome. All the other seats which are going to come in are ones where there really can't be any doubt about who's going to win them on the form that we've had tonight. But I do fear that there's still a long, hard day's day ahead of us.
But one important factor, what this Labour government will be able to do with its very narrow majority, following on what Anthony Howard was saying, Mr. Grimmond has in fact made it very clear that if he held this balancing position, he would not support any renationalisation of steel. And this means that Labour would have to try and get that through with its own majority of 3 or 4, and as I said before, I think you would find this very difficult. And I'm pretty sure he's also made it clear that the Liberals would not support the nationalisation of urban land, which is the other big Labour policy, one which they want to proceed with very quickly. Obviously, on the other hand, he would support the Liberals on the Labour government on pensions. It's something they could get through quite easily.
And no news, Meriden yet. It looks as though it may turn out to be a hard night's day for Sir Alec Douglas-Home. Now let's go down to Transport House, where we meet Peter Woon.
Still, we're waiting here at Transport House for these vital results for that 316 to go up on the board. A mood here throughout the last 24 hours that's really been quite extraordinary to watch. A mood that's changed early last night from dismay, then to a conviction that perhaps there was going to be a landslide, and then late last night to a feeling that it was only going to be a small majority. And now today the most extraordinary atmosphere as the majority, the potential majority, has gone down and down and down, and now nobody knows here quite what to think. Can they get the result through from Meriden? Can it be the right one? Can they take that working majority? Is it a working majority on 2? The professional party workers here have been working for the last 3 weeks and far beyond that. They're waiting, and so are the party leaders down the corridor, watching the television just like us here. Everyone, a mood of extraordinary tenseness and anxiety. From Transport House, Peter Woon.
Well, there's no further news. We're hanging on by our fingernails. Meanwhile, we go up on our platform to you, Robin.
And with me is Nigel Lawson, formerly city editor of the Sunday Telegraph, and recently and during the campaign, closely involved with Sir Alec Douglas Hume in his immediate entourage and going around with him on the campaign trail. Nigel Lawson, what do you think about this matter we've been discussing in the last half hour or so, that if Labour gets a very narrow overall majority, but only just over the edge, the Prime Minister would nonetheless constitutionally be justified in waiting till Parliament reassembled to meet the new House of Commons and then take what came?
Well, I have no authority to speak for the Prime Minister, and I don't know what his views would be. And constitutionally, this is correct. But I think that one has to draw a very clear distinction between a Labour majority, but not an overall majority, with the Liberals holding the balance, in which case it would seem to me, if that were the case, he would quite likely choose to meet Parliament first. But in the circumstances that are now arising, where Labour looks to have an overall majority, albeit a very small one, I would have thought it was unlikely that he would meet Parliament. I thought it was more likely that he would go to the Queen.
Your forecast, or
it's just a guess, but that's what I would suspect.
Your intelligent guess is that the Prime Minister will go to the Palace today.
I don't know how intelligent it is, but that's my guess.
Now, could we turn to another matter? We've had a lot of criticism from Labour spokesmen today of the Conservative campaign and so on, and their pride in their own achievement, which is of course natural. What do you say about the Prime Minister's achievement?
Well, I think in an election as close as this, obviously everybody is thinking if only something had been done slightly differently, and one particular mistake, because always both sides make mistakes in a campaign, and the result might have been different. But I think you have to look at the situation when the Prime Minister took office, and the fantastic recovery in fortune there's been of the Conservative Party. Even if the election had been held in June, for example, I think you might have got a near Labour landslide, and now you have as near as a tie as makes no difference.
We had Mr. John Junor, another Conservative, though an independent one, in the small hours of the morning say that he thought the Conservatives could have won if there'd been a much more dynamic and aggressive campaign fought by Sir Alec Douglas Hume, and that this would shortly lead to a renewal of the Conservative leadership struggle.
Well, I see no evidence for this at all, the first part of your proposition, yes, or the second.
Mr.
John Junor's proposition. Anybody can speculate, but what is clear is that when the Prime Minister took office, there was a Labour Party lead of, about 12 or 13 points in the Gallup poll, and now it's dwindled practically to vanishing point. I think this is a remarkable achievement. And there is another thing, too, I'd like to point out, that the Labour Party, it looks, in the percentage of votes cast, has done very badly, really, compared with what it must have expected. It looks as if it's getting the lowest percentage of the poll of any election since the war, with the exception of 59. Very little more, indeed, than they got in 59. And what has happened, largely, is there's been a swing, or a defection, whatever you like to call it, from the Conservatives to the Liberals. It's the Liberals who've been gaining at the expense of the Conservatives, and the Labour Party has been, so to speak, the residual legatee.
What you have heard of turning to another subject, what you have heard of the trade gap figures out today, which appear to be serious, though I haven't seen the full details myself. What do you say about that as an economist?
Well, that's certainly bad.
How do you think the new government should deal with this situation which they've inherited from the Conservative government?
Well, the new government no doubt has its own ideas on how it's going to deal with this situation, which are not mine.
Hold everything. Here's the Meriden result. I'm waiting for it to be given to me. Meriden has gone to Labour.
Well, that means Labour have got what? They've got 316.
That puts them up to 370 seats. So even with the Deputy Speaker, if they have to provide him, they are quite assured of a clear majority in the next Parliament.
Of 4 overall parties.
Yes.
Yep.
And there's still Caithness, which they might win, so they could get possibly 6 as the absolute outside.
There's Gordon Matthews, who was the Conservative MP for Meriden. He had a majority of 263. He got pretty close, but he's been pushed up by that majority, 363, by Christopher Rowlands, who was a BBC producer and well known round here.
Only 0.5% swing to Labour in Meriden, but that was enough to turn it from one side to the other. The most critical result perhaps we've had this evening, in the whole, I said this evening, in the last 24 hours, and certainly the most anxiously anticipated one.
Now the rest...
Well, with that news, let's hand over now to comment from you, Bob Mackenzie.
Could we? Oh, we haven't got the state of the party board on that just yet. Well, this, of course, it was of critical importance, and it now does make it virtually certain, beyond all possible doubt, that the Labour Party will have its necessary 316. Christopher Rowland is one of the very able young Gateschalites who will play, no doubt, an active part in a future Labour government.
Here's the full figure of Meriden. The Labour gain comes to Rowland from Mr. Matthews.
An 83% turnout, pretty high that, though a slight drop on last time, a 0.6% swing to Labour in Meriden.
And in the light of that success, what are they thinking down at Transport House? Peter Woon, come in.
Here we are. That's the feeling here at Transport House when that Meriden result has come through. That's the one they were waiting for. Now let's get a couple of quick reactions from some Labour Party workers. What's your thoughts?
Oh, immensely exciting after 13 years. It's just the sort of thing we've been waiting for, but a bit sad we haven't an overall working majority, or so it looks at the moment anyway.
What about another election?
Well, that's really up to Mr. Wilson and people like that to decide, but it certainly looks like that from now, doesn't it?
Right, and over on this side, what's your reaction to that one?
It's smashing results there. I'm sure that with Harold in the government for a couple of years, we'll be well away and we'll get all the other followers following behind us.
There you are then, confidence again. So from Labour Party headquarters, Peter Woon.
Any comments now, gentlemen?
Yes, I would back the gentleman, the last gentleman who spoke. I reckon that with this majority, it looks very, very slim, providing that Mr. Wilson doesn't try to force the pace, and he's a very cool political customer. I would fully expect to see him in office for 2 or 3 years.
David? I would think that this is entirely so. I don't think that there's likely to be another election in the immediate future. Obviously, there's the possible tactic of having an election very quickly and demanding an increased majority, but I think that would be extremely unpopular with the British public, who hasn't shown itself tremendously politically, tremendously excited during the last few weeks by the election. I think anybody who forced an election, whether it was the Conservatives or the Labour Party...
Over to Robin Day.
And with me, Lord Blakenham, at the Conservative Central Office, Chairman of the Conservative Party. Lord Blakenham, would you wish to say anything?
Yes, I'd say this. I think this has been a magnificent battle. It's very close indeed. I think, as I said last night, that this is a tremendous tribute to the enthusiasm and energy of our party workers. It's a tremendous tribute to Sir Alec for the way he's led this party during the last year, when a year ago, I think most of you people like Robin Day and the commentators would have said we had no chance at all. I think the fact that still the issue is uncertain is a great tribute to him and to the splendid work of all who worked for the party during this election.
I, in fact, thought you had quite a good chance, Lord Blakenham, but may I go on to ask you this? Are we to expect a statement conceding victory to Mr. Wilson?
There will only be a statement conceding either victory to Sir Alec or to Mr. Wilson when the facts are known. I'm sorry I haven't been very talkative on television, as I've noticed that some other people have been, but it seems to me that this is still a very close-run thing.
You don't admit victory, you don't admit that there's going to be a Labour government?
I don't admit anything at this stage.
What can stop a Labour government now?
This we shall remain to see. We have another 13 results to come in, and we shall know what the result is when those results are known to the nation as a whole.
Lord Blakenham, thank you. Hope to hear from you again shortly on some point or other.
Right. Ian, what do you think about what Lord Blakenham has just said?
Well, with the most profound respect to Lord Blakenham, the few results, we've only got 12 to come in, unless they produce the most extraordinary upheaval ever known in political history. Labour is back in power with a majority of 9.
Here is the Press Association State of the Parties.
314 now for Labour, with 2 more necessary for the formal victory, which is now certain in the sense of getting the necessary 50% plus of the seats in the House. No question whatever that's coming, only a matter of time. It could be a little time yet, but it'll come. The all-important issue remains whether they'll pick up 1 or 2 extra seats in order to get slightly more room for manoeuvre. But at the moment it does look like an overall Labour majority of 4 or 6, somewhere in that vicinity.
David?
Well, I mean, there are, in fact, Brecon, Penistone, Lichfield and Tamworth. It's just conceivable, of course, that Lichfield and Tamworth could go against the tide, because it is in the Black Country area that has been switching, and it's a relatively narrow Labour majority. So I suppose if the Conservatives wish to hang on to the last hope, there is that. On the other hand, the odds are rather on their losing Caithness.
There is a flash from the Press Association which says Labour will form the next government, full stop. Ian?
Well, I presume that's simply based on the Meriden result and on all the qualifications.
I would have thought so, yes.
Lichfield and Tamworth has been held by Labour. That speculation of mine has been put out. So, in fact, they have now got 315 seats.
So they are now certainly the majority party in sheer seats won.
But there's one crude fact we must point out. There are only going to be 2 Conservatives over 70 in the next Parliament. There are going to be about 20 Labour members over 70, and old men do sometimes die or fall ill, and this isn't a comfortable margin for forcing old men to come and vote through the night.
Yes, I think also, but on the other hand, most of those old men over 70 are in safe seats, so it's rather a ghoulish conversation. But if by any chance they do die, they will be by-elections in safe Labour seats.
How macabre can you be?
I'm sorry, but...
Where do we go? Thurscombe Moulton is in, yes. The Right Honourable Robin Turton has got back at Thurscombe Moulton for the Conservatives.
Now the Father of the House of Commons, jointly with Mr R.A. Buckler, they've both sat continuously since 1929. 2.6% swing to the Labour in Thurscombe Moulton, 73% turnout.
Can we come back to this question of the Labour majority? If Labour has got a majority over all other parties of 9, the crucial point is this is all right for a single vote. And it'll enable them to win single votes. It will make life very difficult for them in the detailed committee stage when they'll only have a majority of 1 in the standing committees on legislation, and this means they only need 1 chap with flu or one of David's 70 old men to lose their majority on a standing committee. This is going to be their main problem in managing the House.
Any further comments? No, here's the result. Dr. Johnson said Lichfield and Tamworth had the most sober and decent people in England. He lived there. They have, in fact, kept their Labour candidate, Mr. Julian Snow.
A 2% swing to Labour in Lichfield and Tamworth.
David, we're away from you.
Away from me. I don't have profound thoughts. We want to see the results from Penistone and Brecon and Radnor to come, and then much later this evening, Western Isles. These are the ones that Labour really expects to get.
Can I come back to this committee thing? This is absolutely crucial. It sounds a technical point, but if we're talking about how Labour is going to carry on for 2 or 3 years, it's crucial.
Let's go to the PA board, please.
Okay, that's fine. Good later.
Here we are then, Labour just hovering on the brink of the necessary 316. It's perfectly clear now they're getting it, and may go 1 or 2 over that, which will be a very important consideration in their ability to carry on for a lengthy period in the next Parliament. The Liberals may get there up to 6 or 7 yet, conceivably, and this could also be very relevant to what happens next. I'd like to add to what's been said about the problem of parties carrying on with small majorities, that we have examples mentioned earlier in Australia. Menzies carrying on for 3 years with a 1-seat majority. Pearson in Canada simply has been carrying on without a majority, in effect defying the others to bring him down. Several minor parties involved, knowing another election would be unpopular, and carrying on quite successfully without an overall majority. There are plenty of precedents. It doesn't always make for the best of governments, but nonetheless it's perfectly possible to carry on with luck and with good management in a situation of this kind.
I think the phrase good management here is highly operative. Whatever his critics may say of Harold Wilson, I don't think anybody will ever deny that he is not a supreme political manager. He will have as his leader of the House almost certainly Bert Bowden, who's been the Labour Chief Whip, again a superb manager, and they will manage the House of Commons very well, even with this narrow majority. But as I keep on saying, their problem is going to be these standing committees.
David, further comment from you.
Nigel Lawson just now blamed the Liberals for the result in this election. There really isn't any evidence that way. The swing to Labour has been just as great in the straight fights, where there was no Liberal to complicate the situation, as otherwise. It's plain that Liberals took votes fairly evenly from both sides, and there was just a straight switch from Labour to Conservative. Conservative to Labour, sorry.
Assuming that we are going to have a Labour government, there is, of course, going to be a tremendous upheaval in Whitehall. I think it was Hugh Dalton who said that it's the first 48 hours of a new minister in his department which decides whether he is going to run the department or whether his civil servants are going to run it. And all next week you will have Conservative ministers moving out, new Labour ministers moving in, some of them with very little or sometimes no experience of running a government department. It's going to be a very testing time for them, a testing time for the civil service, and indeed for the whole administration.
We have a result in from Brecknockshire and Radnorshire. In the nick of time, Tudor Watkins has held the seat of Brecon for Labour.
He's held it since 1939. That's a 3% swing to the Labour Party in Brecon and Radnor. A 82% poll in Brecon and Radnor, which is rather high for that very scattered Welsh constituency.
Incidentally, somebody earlier today was saying that the most senior civil servants are going to vote Labour. I think we ought to make it clear that, well, I don't know how they vote, and it's not our business, but oh, sorry.
Oh, there's no hurry. I was only saying when you're ready. However, Alan Wicker is knocking around at the gates of Buckingham Palace. I think you'd better put him out of his misery. Over to Wicker.
Alan Wicker at the south centre gate of Buckingham Palace. There's a small crowd here standing in crisp sunshine, for it is through this gate that the crowd expects Sir Alec will shortly drive to hand in his resignation to the Queen, to hand in his seals. Do you think this resignation, if it comes about, will be a mournful occasion or a cheerful one for you?
Well, very mixed feelings. I would like to have seen whatever party got in have a slightly higher majority than seems likely. I think it's a pity that whoever gets in will probably have to compromise to some extent in their policies.
What do you think?
Well, I'm an American, so I don't have a political opinion, but if I did, I would say that I'm very sorry to see the Conservative government out of power, but sorrier still to see Britain without a decisive mandate at this time.
Yes, I think we certainly should have had a strong government, whichever party it was, and I think that Hume would have had a far better chance if he appealed more directly to the people. I think Rab Butler would have possibly got the Conservatives in, but all the shenanigans that went on when Hume was chosen, I think people have remembered it and they didn't like it.
Did you vote Conservative or Labour, man?
I voted Conservative this time.
Are you Conservative? Or?
Yes, I'm voting Conservative.
Yes, I'm Conservative. I expected a majority, a good Conservative majority, better than, not as good as last time, of course, but better than. I think it's very unfortunate. I think everyone, irrespective of his opinion, would like to have a good working majority.
Why do you think this has come about?
The actual reason, I really can't...
Did you vote, may I ask?
Yes, I voted, yes.
On what issues do you think the Conservatives lost the election?
I really can't say. We thought that everyone was quite satisfied with the way things were going, and it's a great disappointment that so many people have voted Labour. I just can't understand people who do vote Conservative.
Yes, for 13 years of constant government, I think lots of people thought it's time for a change anyway, after 13 years.
And you're speaking as a Conservative?
I'm speaking as a Conservative.
I think that's changing for changing's sake.
I think the Liberals have been a lot to do with it. They fought elections where they knew they hadn't any chance, and they made promises to a government that if they couldn't possibly make good, and they couldn't get into power in any case. They hadn't sufficient candidates. But I think they've made more trouble for the Conservatives than anyone. That's my opinion.
Are you a Conservative? Or
I am a Conservative, yeah.
Are you, madam? Did you vote in this election?
I couldn't vote. I'm here on holiday. And I would like to have voted now that I've seen the state of things.
How would you have voted?
I would have voted Labour, and I still hope the Labour get in.
Well, it seems that they will.
Good.
Alan Wicker, Buckingham Palace.
Now, in the absence still we're waiting to see a Press Association board which says the magic figure 316. We might go to it and see what it says now.
They're showing still 315. I think we actually have gone beyond that point. I don't know whether we can get back to another board, which I believe does show the historic moment of arriving. Is this possible that we can see the other board? The moment has arrived. Apparently not. Apparently not. Not yet, but I've reason to think the historic moment has arrived. We'll see it graphically in a second or two.
The Penistone result, I should think, was almost certainly coming in to give Labour its last victory needed to give them 316 seats, a clear majority in a House of 630.
Well, we've heard from Alan Wicker outside Buckingham Palace. I rather wonder what everybody's saying inside Buckingham Palace, but I don't suppose we'll be able to do a direct television broadcast from there this afternoon. Ian?
People have already started saying what lost the election. This post-mortem will now go on for weeks. One I suspect that both parties might agree on is that it's the young married people. I know these are the people the Conservatives were getting worried about the last few days. People who were old enough to have acquired mortgages in the last 2 years, but too young to have remembered a Labour government and therefore fairly impervious to any Conservative warnings. I know the Conservatives in one or two areas are disappointed to find they weren't getting as many of these people as they hoped. Labour correspondingly were rather gratified to find they were getting more of them. May well have been these people who were pushing it over.
We go now to join Michael Charlton.
And here we have three well-known political correspondents, Keith Kyle, Nigel Lawson, formerly of the Sunday Telegraph, and Anthony Hyde of the Statesman. We deal very briefly, quickly, with the campaign. First of all, where were the mistakes made, do you think?
Well, I think that the Tories didn't really make mistakes. They suffered from accidents. And there were blunders. I think their basic approach of playing it quiet, of not keeping the temperature down was the correct one. I'm sure John Juno is wrong in saying that the Tories should have fought a much more vigorous campaign and they'd have done better. I think that's hooey.
Nigel Lawson.
Yes, I agree with Tony Howard, and I think too that there was bad luck on both sides in various ways, and perhaps the biggest stroke of bad luck we had was Mr. Hill's intervention into the Hardy-Spicer dispute, which could quite easily have turned the whole election. I mean, it just shows how close this is. But if I may, before going on this, reply to something David said earlier. I wasn't saying that the Liberals had lost the election for the Conservative Party. Obviously, in some constituencies they've drawn votes from Conservatives, others from the Socialists. What I was saying, purely statistically, is that the Labour Party's proportion of the vote has gone up by about 0.5%. It's practically remained stable, and what has happened is that the Liberals have gained and Conservatives have lost, but the Labour Party has stayed pretty well where it is, in proportion of the total national poll.
Very quickly, what occurs to you as being the major campaign mistakes?
I think the major mistake was that of the Prime Minister in concentrating on an issue which, quite apart from the fact that he, in my opinion, kept getting it wrong, was an issue which did not interest the public, that is that of the nuclear weapon. Perhaps the public sensed that it was in a way being insulted by the way in which the issue was being projected.
The public took any notice of the issue at all? I think it didn't work out well.
I disagree with that totally. All the evidence, both in the national opinion polls and in the letters to Conservative candidates and so on from constituents, showed that there was a steadily growing interest in this issue as the campaign progressed, and towards the end, as you remember, the national opinion poll came out showing over half the population thought that this mattered very much.
And you're accepting this too, are you?
Well, no, Nigel, I can accept that, because if what you say is true, then the Conservatives did muff it. They either left it too late, and the Prime Minister should never have said he was fighting the election on home issues. I really don't think it counted. You were making a point last night, how splendid and wonderful it would have been if we could have got the news from the Kremlin slightly earlier than we did.
24 hours earlier.
The rebuttal to that, we now know, from the Labour Party's point of view, is how splendid and wonderful it would have been if we could have got the trade figures 24 hours earlier.
I don't think the trade figures, if we can go on to that.
Yes, let's deal with that now then. I mean, how serious do you is this going to be?
I mean, whereas Mr. Khrushchev's removal has produced a totally new situation, the trade figures have not produced a totally new situation. One month's figures don't alter the picture at all. We knew that there was a really difficult trade problem. We knew that exports weren't rising, and there is a long-term problem of making British industry more competitive and getting exports to rise.
Come off it now. I mean, the fact was there was a certain strategy by the Treasury. They accepted the fact that there would be a rise in the imports of manufactured goods and of raw materials, which would put the trade gap in a difficult situation for a while. They would borrow during this period, and then they would get their reward of increased exports. Exports are continuing to fall. This is a major crisis.
Keith Kyle, we'll be coming back to this.
While we're campaigning, lifeblood's been oozing away.
No, this is completely over.
Having a good time. Meanwhile, we will just go and see what's cooking down in Downing Street with Michael Barrett.
Well, nothing is cooking except that we are still waiting, still everybody here, the cameramen behind me and the crowd in front of me here, conscious of a historic moment, of a moment when that door is going to open, and it really may be any moment. Every now and again a murmur goes round this very tense crowd, and somebody says 315 seats, and then there's a rumour that they've got another. It is really a case of rumour all the way at the moment, and again, as I said before, when anybody leaves that door, somebody suggests it may be a bodyguard or the chauffeur, and that the Prime Minister may be coming out. This crowd in front of me here, I'm not sure. Oh, there's a dust wagon. I don't know whether you saw it, went just past me there, and one of the earlier people who came out of number 10 was in fact the laundryman. I don't know how significant that is. Among the crowd here, as I said before, rather long faces. One of course can't tell how many are Tory supporters or Labour or Liberal, or even those don't-knows who may have affected the election so much. But it seems to me quite clear, without talking to all of them of course, that there is very deep sympathy felt by all of them here for Sir Alec Douglas-Hume, for a man who is beaten. For the moment then, back to Richard Dimbleby. This is Michael Barrett in Downing Street.
Let's have a look at the Press Association State of the Party Board, shall we?
The magic number has not yet come up. We're waiting still for 316. It was a false alarm a moment ago, and we're standing therefore on the brink, waiting for that next and final result to ensure Labour's clear win.
Ian, comment from you.
Well, while we're waiting, sympathy for Sir Alec Douglas-Hume. I'm sure he will have been Prime Minister, just under a year. I think it's the shortest premiership for well over a century. The question, of course, arises now as to whether he will remain leader of or how long he may remain leader of the Conservative Party. Last night we heard beginnings of criticism on this programme from John Junor, as I think Robin Day was quoting. It remains to be seen how effective Sir Alec is as a leader of the opposition, which is very different from being Prime Minister. But the fact is, I think Nigel Lawson was saying that if you think back to the situation when Sir Alec became Prime Minister, he has brought around an enormous transformation. And one's guess is that the Conservative Party will, in this sort of situation, with such a narrow majority against them, hold pretty solid, at least for the time being. What will happen if Mr. Wilson stays in office 6 months, a year, and then begins to look as if he's getting confidence? This could be another situation.
We are, I think we should say, waiting for only about 3 results in the next hour or so. Penistone, which is a safe Labour seat, is still to come in, and on the other side, Hexham and the Prime Minister's seat of Kinross have expected to report this afternoon. Ross and Cromarty will probably, on past form, come a good deal later, and Caithness and Sutherland, Inverness and Western Isles are probably very late this evening. There's one other thing I'd like to say, and that is that this election, having been won by such an extremely narrow margin, there's going to be an enormous amount of sort of wishful thinking afterwards, and people will wonder about things. If Mr. Khrushchev had been sacked a day earlier, if it hadn't rained on polling day, if Labour had been more energetic on the postal vote, if Sir Alec Douglas-Hume had fought a different campaign, if the Conservatives had kept up with their commercial-type television programmes, or if they hadn't even started them. These sort of things will be argued very hard on both sides. I'm writing a book about this election for the 4th time, and I think this is going to be the most tense and difficult and exciting challenge of writing a book. But Tony Howard up there is also writing a book about the election. He's going to get one out first, I believe.
I'm waiting for you to give the publisher's name and the date. I was going to say pundits, I mustn't use the word. Our experts up on the platform, they were getting nicely hotted up just now when we were with them. Let's go back and see if they can resume.